Good morning, Baltimore. It is Thursday, June 25th, and thank you for tuning in to the latest episode of the Early Birds podcast. I'm your host, Matt Weyrich, alongside sports columnist Josh Tolentino, and we've got a fun one for you guys today, an interview with Mike Shildt, Orioles upper-level minor league coordinator of instruction, who joined us for about 20 minutes here, very generous this time, talk about Cal Ripken's impact on the Orioles organizational shift into focusing more on fundamentals at the minor league level. Some great insights there from Mike, so stay tuned from that. But first, Josh here coming in from LAX on his way out to Hawaii for a much-deserved vacation after getting the exclusive with new Ravens play-by-play man Kyle Youmans. Josh, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great, man. Certainly busy here over these past few days. Still going to be working here the next couple days, but once this weekend starts, man, really looking forward to getting out here. It's kind of like the lull before NFL training camp starts, and going to be celebrating my girlfriend's graduation as a pediatric dentist. She's finishing up her residency in Hawaii, so we'll be a lot to celebrate this weekend. So you mentioned I'm at LAX. The layover, unfortunately, it's not long enough to meet up our guy JCM Jacob to do a dual trip to Disney. Although the Orioles are having a day game today.
Yeah, I know. He did text us after last episode, said he would 100% do it by himself, if not for the fact that his wife and daughter might disown him from this family if they weren't brought along. So understandable, Jacob, a family man here, but the Disney allegiance runs deep for sure. No chance for you to go meet up with him, but hope you enjoy Hawaii and hanging out with your girlfriend and celebrating what is an awesome moment for her. My wife is actually just out in Hawaii last week and visiting her sister out there who's a travel nurse, and came back with a ton of stories. I know it's beautiful. You've been obviously a few times, and very jealous. I've still never been. I was counting the other day of how many states I've been to. Only 27 states, which is crazy because at the end of this year, I've been to 27 ballparks. Somehow I've only been to 27 out of the 50 states. So I need to start ramping up my numbers.
For our YouTube listeners, you'll be able to see that I was shaking my head when Matt said he's never been to Hawaii. You got to go over there, man, at some point. This off season, whenever it may be, but make it soon because it is gorgeous out there. Explore the different islands out there. The one I'm going to for this trip is in Oahu, but so much other gorgeous places to explore out there. I'm not sure if you're into hiking, but so many tremendous, magnificent hikes, and I could go on and on about my love for the islands. So you got to get on that trip soon.
Yeah, I love me a good hike, and Hawaii's got that kind of blend of like jungle, mainland, but beaches on the outskirts, tons of views, top of mountains. My wife was sending me a picture of watching the sunset on top of a volcano where the sun was setting over top the clouds. I mean, hard to beat something like that. It's definitely on the bucket list for sure. Very jealous that she got to go out there, and I'm sure I'll see some pictures and stuff from when you're out there, and I'll be just as jealous the second time around. So it's on the list. It's on the list. But we're going to go ahead and jump in here with our interview with Mike. I sat down with him a little bit earlier today here on Wednesday, talk about some fundamentals and the impact of his that he has had and Cal Ripken Jr. has had on the organization as it reshifts its focus on the player development side. So we'll see you guys on the other end of that. And we're now joined here by Mike Shildt, former manager of the St. Louis Cardinals and San Diego Padres, and now working in the Orioles front office, minor league core here, joined the team over the offseason. Mike, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, Matt, my privilege. It's always exciting to talk Oriole baseball, right?
Absolutely, and it's something you've been doing for a long time, dating back to when you were 8 years old, running around the clubhouse at AA Charlotte, shining shoes for Cal Ripken Jr. How much of a full circle kind of experience has this been for you working for that team?
It was really heady when it first materialized November, but now it's literally a dream come true. And you alluded to the fact I grew up. My dad proposed to my mom in the old Memorial Stadium, and grew up in Baltimore and grew up a huge Oriole fan. Then got the ability. My mom worked in the AA ballpark for 8 years in Charlotte for the Orioles, and so I grew up an Oriole fan and getting indoctrinated into that ecosystems. And now here we are.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I understand Cal was one of the people who called you over the offseason to recruit you directly. What was that conversation like, and how much were you kind of chomping at the bit to take this opportunity in particular?
Yeah, I took a step back from managing to do exactly what I'm doing now, and to reconnect with Cal was the cherry on top. I've history with Mike Elias and Sig and Matt Blood, and a lot of respect for that group. And I know we may get to that later, but it's Cal Ripken, and when you go from 12 years old, seeing him every day, playing every day in Charlotte, third base. And going through and win the Southern League championship, and just being a part of that environment and seeing him model at 12 years old when Cal's 19 how to go about things professionally and how to play the game. It created a long lasting impact that's allowed me to share some of those things that I learned at a young age with players, and then now to come full circle and work with Cal, on a fairly regular basis. We have discussions and just enjoy talking baseball, is really special.
Now, your title is upper level coordinator of instruction, and that's a new position that was kind of created when you were brought in. They also add a lower level coordinator as well with the internal promotion. When your hire came through, it was kind of a sign that the Orioles were starting to maybe take more seriously some of the fundamentals and player development side of things. Where have you kind of seen the impact of your role in your instruction being felt the most across this organization?
Yeah, so me and Sam Vega both have new roles. Sam does the from low A down. I do from triple A, double A, and high A. And we work really well together, work in concert with organizational philosophy, which I'll get into. And, I can talk about this for quite a bit and in some detail. So um, just cut me off. I go too far too quickly. But,
No,
but
please.
yeah, no, listen, it's a new role. I applaud, first of all, our ownership. You got to tip your hat to the ownership and the resource. I'm sitting here in Chesapeake now in Bowie with a double A club, and I've been to Frederick. Obviously, the spring training facilities in Sarasota are becoming industry standards. I mean, the facilities here that allow us to develop players are industry elite. And so ownership's really investing, obviously on the field, but also off the field. And that's required, to look to be an elite franchise, which is what the Orioles expect to be, and look to go compete for a World Series, not in a one-off, but on a consistent basis, have sustainable success. And, you mentioned growing up as an Oriole fan. The Orioles were the winningest franchise from 1954 to 1979. And, I was part of the back end of kind of witnessing and growing up in that Oriole way. And you mentioned Cal, and you know, as part of this process, Cal is a huge part of the process, and in an appropriate manner. And you look at this, and one of the things that I've loved about the game of baseball, but also when I grew up with the Orioles, was the institutional knowledge that got passed down, and the continuity that took place in that organization. And Cal's a unicorn in the sense of, clearly the streak and the talent. But now Cal is an outlier unicorn relative to, you know, having a resource that goes back to his dad. Cal Sr. was a huge part of that, you know, 25-year success period that was unparalleled in the industry, and was a leader in it. So Cal's got the perspective of playing, the perspective of growing up with his dad, going through the minor leagues and seeing how that was taught and implemented. And so using that resource that is Cal is really fantastic. And I spent 18 years in St. Louis, and the sustained success that had taken place in that organization was also predicated upon using their legacy um, pieces in the organization that built it. I mean, it was Bob Gibson and Lou Brock and Ozzie Smith and Red Shanedeast and um, Willie McGee, and as it got later on, Chris Carpenter, and so using Cal as that resource, and he's very deferential, Matt. I mean, he personifies class, but he also personifies what it takes to understand how to fundamentally play this game. and he understands it as good as anybody that. And this is saying something because I've been around some Hall of Fame traditionally, you know, elite people in this industry, and Cal is right there on that Mount Rushmore, and so his ability to be able to articulate, see, um, and deferentially say, hey, what do you think about this, and what are we talking about that? Well, it's been important that I recognize from our leadership perspective, from Matt Elias, and that group is, a pivoting of, all right. And I will stop and say this, man. I believe sincerely that it's harder now to lead in this industry than ever before. The good news is we have all these resources, right? You have all these things at the disposal of the industry. Um, the other side of it is we have a lot of things in the industry, and what does that balancing act look like? What does that sweet spot look like for competition to win games? And so I was pleased to be a part of a group with Sam and organizational philosophy to um, look towards fundamentally how we're going to play the game to win the game. And so I champion Mike and tip my hat to him quite a bit of being able to figure out what that looks like and be able to pivot into it. And of course that, dovetails into Albie. We take our
Mm.
cue ultimately from Albie and the big league staff, and the operating procedures fundamentally, bunt plays, cutoffs, relays, first and thirds, all the different things that mechanically um, we want to have alignment with from top to bottom an organization. And I know he's emphasized that quite a bit, and we're doing our part on the player development side to glean it, take it, and then replicate it so it trickles down, and then it trickles back up to the big birds.
Yeah, and you mentioned that Oriole way. I think it's something that's left such a big impression on the fan base as well as kind of the expectation of how Orioles baseball is played. I mean, Cal Ripken Jr. isn't just, a Hall of Famer for representing the organization, but a gleaning representation of the style of baseball that this team played so successfully for so long. And fans have kind of felt like over the last couple of years, maybe that lost its way a little bit. There wasn't as clean a baseball being played at the major league level. There wasn't as much bunting and moving guys over or taking, pitches as they come, hitting it the other way when it calls for it. Those kinds of things, situational awareness. How much of that is part of your daily conversations in the things that you're trying to instill in the minor leagues? And how much have you kind of seen just in your short time here with the organization that become more and more of a focus?
It's absolutely a focus. And again, finding that sweet spot of what that looks like, coupled with all the different resources that do make our more modern game. But, I can confidently tell you this, and, the Baltimore fan base is historic and very educated. They know what good baseball looks like. And so, the one thing that will never change is, fundamental execution. While no guarantee to win games, if you don't do it, will virtually guarantee that you don't win as many as you're capable of. And that's the emphasis of what we're working towards. There was an evaluation period that is and when you use evaluation and words like patience, fan bases don't want to hear that. Trust me, I've been there at the big league level. We want, and understandably, by the way, we want results. But the implementation is starting to take place. First of all, learning the nuance of what the big league staff wants. Um, my particular, modus operandi is to come in and to observe, evaluate, collect information, create relationships, and then we'll kind of take that audit of where we are, how we do things, and then start to implement and progress how we need to move forward. And patience is required with that. But it's also um, taking the steps required to get to there being sustainable, consistent clarity from top to bottom, from Baltimore to Dominican, where we understand, to your point, and well said, what is the situational awareness? The game in general has gone away from more situational baseball. So the amateur player comes up in more of a skill developed based model. So understanding how to play the game, how to see the game, how to play to win the game, because that's still that scoreboard's still real, is where we're currently are, and we're making strides. And in player development, as you know, it's not the end all be all about winning, but there is an understanding of how to win. And 3 weeks ago, the minor league system now is clear in how periods get defined, meaning a day off on Monday, 6 consecutive games. And so you can get into a little bit better rhythm than historically you could have gotten into with travel and et cetera, and the built-in day off. But 3 weeks ago, the organization from Norfolk all the way to the Dominican, which we have two clubs there, 7 teams, had the best winning percentage in all of minor league baseball, and all professional 30 teams had the best winning percentage. What does that mean? It means we're working towards that portion of it improving and getting more consistent across and throughout a system. Frederick won their first half, and did a really nice job. They got a talented club. There's an exciting group of players there that will be knocking on the door sooner than later, and being part of that sustainable long-term success of Oriole baseball, which is what we're all signing up for, including myself. So that's there's some good news. Then as a example of that, last night in Bowie, club's got a 3-2 lead. We're later in the game. Doug Hodo gets on second base. We got nobody out. Estrada's hitting. He's intentful to look. Roberto Mercado does a really good job. Here's the manager, to get him over. It's a ground ball to short. It's one of those in-between plays, Matt, that if you're not aware where the shortstop is playing, you may not advance to third on that ground ball. But third base coach, Cal Christensen, made him aware, hey, shortstop's right here. Hodo's aware. Ground ball's hit. He's able to get to third base. Great, good read. Next, we get a ground ball to third. He's on the contact play, which we've really emphasized, talked to Buck Britton a lot about, and are teaching and creating that continuity. Ground ball to third, to the right of third baseman. Hodo runs inside to block the throwing lane from the third baseman. Third baseman not sure what to do, throws it away. O's get a 4-2 lead. That's not going to be talked about, shown up with, but the bottom line is that's a great representation of what's taking place here that leads us to go and play winning baseball.
100%. And that's certainly I think you kind of touch on this of like the emphasis on skills in today's game of, throwing the hardest or hitting the hardest, having the most elite speed, that kind of thing. Blending those traits together into a winning baseball player is more maybe an art than science. I think you'd agree in a lot of ways, as opposed to the fine tuning of those skills. Is maybe more of on the science side, because you have to hit a certain weight or get your bat speed up to a certain number, things like that. Like with the state of today's game, how do you kind of see front offices maybe just across baseball going back towards the art side of things a little bit after the analytics revolution really changed the way everything was done?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. That's a sweet spot I refer to. And I do think the industry has overcorrected in the skill development side of it. We monetize it amateur wise, collegially, professionally. So I understand it. However, it is more of the art and the nuances of how to play the game situationally that ultimately use that skill set. And so we really work into two different things on the player development side. One is the organizational philosophy of, how do we execute our plays? And then secondly is individually with those skill sets, how do we rep them strategically and put players in an awareness? Because really the players are the ones that actually have to get on the field and go play. And one of the things I've said for years is, championship players think and do for themselves. And our job is to get the understanding of the science, but also the art, but most importantly, the comprehension of the game and what the game calls for in that moment, for that player to be able to, in real time, in high pressure, be so well trained that regardless of circumstances, he's going to be aware of the situation, which changes immediately. Baseball is really, human chess, played at a very fast level, and even faster now with the pitch clock. So ability to think, analyze, anticipate, and then go execute, and the player's awareness to that is a massive competitive advantage that I've personally experienced professionally at the highest level for some number of years consistently. So I can speak with absolute confidence in it and recognize that in the industry, it's been a separator with certain organizations that do value that at all levels, including the big league level. And I'm excited about what the future brings for Baltimore Oriole baseball.
Now, I understand one of the point of emphasis for you has been verbiage and using kind of the same words throughout the organization to stabilize things. Like one of the examples I heard was Pete Alonso likes to yell, "I got it, I got it, I got it," when he's calling off teammates for a pop up, right? And
Right.
that is now something that is being taught, as I understand, to the rest of the organization, so that when guys get up to the big leagues, it's the exact same thing. How just important is that to kind of establish and standardize throughout the organization? And what are maybe some other examples of that kind of thing where it could pay dividends?
Yeah, no, it's exactly how this works. And we serve at the pleasure of the big league club. And the big league club obviously represents the players and Albie and the staff. And, however they want to use their phraseologies, our job is to take it and make sure it's being taught, understood. And then when they get there, that transition is smooth, clean, and effective. Um, and so, yeah, it's a great example, on we call it the tweener play, where, is that ground ball, typically a left-handed hitter, doesn't have to be, or a push bunt, where that a pitcher is going to come over to cover the bag, that communication with the first baseman, and Pete was, clear, like, I want to call it, I'm going to use I got it, and that's how we'll do it. Great. We'll go teach it. One of the things mentioned, alluded to Buck Britton, talking about his verbiage, his communication, and I've spent some real time with Buck on the contact play. And what is he saying to the runners? What is he doing? And I won't get into too much of the weeds with it, but the fact of the matter is now I've been able to go to AAA, AA, and A ball. We show video of the plays. I talk through it with using Buck's terminology. There's continuity with it. These are the conversations that we have organizationally, and that really creates the Oriole way. And the Oriole way is just doing things together and having people like Cal or other legacy players like Brian Roberts spoke in minor league camp about stealing third. It was elite, and it was also elite not only from a position player standpoint, but the perspective it gave to pitchers. And we got our man T-Bone Shelby and McGregor and you know Ben McDonald and that group coming in, and AJ, of course, Jonesy. Um, so the more we can do these things together and make sure that we're standardizing to create clarity for our player, because player clarity leads to player confidence, and player confidence leads to championship players.
Absolutely. And one last thing before I let you go. You've talked a lot about the major league staff and the trickle down you want there. How have you seen Craig Albernaz in particular pushing for change? How has he kind of tried to institute things that he's obviously come from some very analytically and successful small market organizations himself in Cleveland and Tampa Bay? How have you kind of seen him make his imprint on the organization from top down?
Yeah, I mean, clearly that rightfully he's been able to pick his staff, and he has the autonomy, and I believe in it because that's how it was in St. Louis. It trickles down, like I said. As far as the how much I've seen it, quite frankly, Matt, not a lot because I'm not there. I don't need to be there. But the good news is he's got the freedom, rightfully, to bring in his philosophies, his thought processes, and ultimately, it's for me and us to go execute. And um, beyond that, we follow the lead of the staff.
Awesome. Well, great stuff, Mike. Really appreciate the time. Thanks so much for giving us your insights here on a side of the organization that doesn't get a whole lot of light shined on it from time to time. So it's good to kind of dive into the weeds a little bit and see how things are going down on the farm. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely, my privilege, and go Orioles.
And we're back. Want to say thank you again to Mike Shildt coming on the show here. as a guest. It was great to talk ball with him and get a better understanding of the way the Orioles are doing things differently than maybe they were this time last year. You know, Mike Elias notably talked about right after firing Brandon Hyde that the Orioles were going to be looking at all aspects of the organization internally to reflect on whether or not things needed to be changed systematically. And player development was one of the things that he mentioned at that time as something that they were going to take a hard look at. And with Cal Ripken Jr. taking on a bigger role as a minority owner of the franchise, and the hire of Mike Shildt, promotion of Sam Vega, and to make these new positions of minor league coordinators of instruction, it has certainly been a big step that the organization has taken. Something that will take time, of course, to see it bear fruit at the major league level, but certainly a hard look in the mirror for the Orioles from top to bottom, and one that they hope is going to start to create a new Oriole way, as Mike Shildt put it, and in bringing back the way of clean fundamental baseball that this organization used to be so famous for back in the day.
Shout out to Shilty after his experience there at the end in San Diego, just given his age and how much time and dedication he's put into the game. He could have called it and rode off into the sunset, but man, as we've learned through your interview and his time here with the Orioles, man, he's got that love for not just the game but for teaching these young players. So really looking forward to seeing the impact here as he builds more time with the organization.
Absolutely. So let's switch gears now and talk some Ravens here, particularly the new hire of Kyle Youmans, the new play-by-play man who replaces the longtime broadcaster Gerry Sandusky, who'd been there for 20 years in the booth. This is a position that has not had a lot of turnover in the history of the Ravens, so certainly an impactful hire for them to bring him in alongside Rod Woodson in the radio booth. Josh, in your conversations with Youmans and people around him, what's your understanding of just kind of how this process came to be?
Yeah, let's set up the job first. And this is one that does not come open that often in the history of the Ravens. There have been two voice of the Ravens. First, Scott Garceau, the franchise's first radio voice. He had the role from 1996 to 2005, and as you mentioned, over the past 20 years, Gerry Sandusky, who announced his retirement in April. So following his retirement, the Ravens underwent a pretty massive search to replace Gerry, and just in all of my conversations with folks around Kyle or around the Ravens, this is essentially how I'm going to break down the process of what it's looked like for the Ravens, the front office, over these past few weeks and months. So Gerry announced his retirement again in April. Their search generated hundreds of applicants, and the Ravens actually hired a third-party search firm to trim that list all the way down to a handful of finalists. I heard the number was 3. So Kyle and the other finalists were flown into Owings Mills for interviews. And, that includes meeting and interacting with so many different people with the organization. On the president's side under Sashi Brown and his team. But the interview process, it also included auditions, Matt. I actually, when I found out this information, I remember when I was applying to the Sun and things were heating up. Our old sports editor, Tim, shout out to him, just got a recent promotion. I actually had a mock column. So in a similar sense, Kyle had a mock call of some Ravens games, including one from last season. He didn't want to dive into, which particular game or sequence it was, but man, so many dramatic wins and losses from last season for him to call. So that must have been an exciting process for him and the Ravens to learn about his skill set. And early last week is when Kyle received the news and ultimately accepted the offer from the Ravens. We're recording now on Wednesday, publishing on June 25th, Thursday. I spoke to him this past Monday. By Tuesday, he was flying back to Baltimore for his welcome day at the Castle photo shoot. Sit down with the Vault, the team's in-house podcast, all the like, and then the Ravens formally introduced him today on Wednesday. So a long whirlwind, a process for both the Ravens and Kyle, but ultimately the Ravens land on a 30-year-old candidate in Kyle Youmans, who, I think when we look at this coaching staff, you look at particularly, there's been a lot of chatter about Declan Doyle, the offensive coordinator, and his age and his preparedness and readiness for the job. It's almost a similar sense in Kyle and everything that I've learned directly from him, from folks around him. I actually, for full transparency, I was previously in that media market. He comes from the Dallas Cowboys, worked with the team over the past 7 seasons. A couple seasons ago, I was covering the Cowboys down there, so had a lot of interactions with Kyle and other great folks down there. But man, just running really quickly through his resume, over the past 6 years, he's called over 600 play-by-play broadcasts, and essentially his role, Matt, as I kind of dive into his time with the Cowboys, his first role started in production. So not even on camera, not even with a headset. That's what he was hired to do for the Cowboys back in 2019. And ultimately, just over the past 6 years, the Cowboys, his role grew tremendously and touched so many different areas, to the point where he was in a much more visible role, leading a lot of their on-air shows as a host, as a reporter, and ultimately balancing that with calling games for freelance broadcasts. So throughout the fall season, while he's working his primary Cowboys job, he's also, flying and driving out to call national college football games. And, that's where the ball knowledge really comes from. And he points to that as being, one of his favorite assignments is calling football. So I'm getting a little long-winded here, and I'll let you jump in. But yeah, an exciting time for Kyle, and certainly the Ravens as they take a chance here on Kyle Youmans. But certainly everything that I've learned about him, man, is he's going to prepare the best that he can, and can share some of those quotes here certainly in a little bit from this interview.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's certainly going to be a competitive job. It's not often that one of these positions opens up across the NFL. So that they're willing to bring in somebody 30 years old. Certainly an impressive resume, as you said, is called, I believe, 700 games between college football and the NFL. Is that correct? I mean,
Yep. Yeah, I actually had the number around 600, but in the Ravens announcement, they put 700. So,
geez. I mean,
yeah.
it's impressive stuff, certainly for someone that young, but also I think is somebody who they now can see can step into this mantle and take the job for a long time, become the new voice of the Ravens, somebody who builds the bulk of their career in this market and with this team, and obviously being where the Ravens are with Lamar Jackson and kind of in the middle of this era, even with a new head coach coming in, it's a chance for him to kind of cement himself as part of this Lamar Jackson era. Not one that has had a Super Bowl as of yet, but Gerry Sandusky never called a Lamar Jackson Super Bowl either. So now that mantle here falls on Youmans. So certainly if the Ravens are able to get to that point, he will be forever ingrained as part of that, as assuming his tenure goes well and he's here for the long haul, as the Ravens likely expect. But what kind of stood out to you about his background and what led him to here? Particularly, I thought it was really interesting in your story how you dove into his childhood a little bit and how he was kind of the subject of bullying as a kid.
Yeah, I'll get into 2 instances here to answer your question on basically how he's grown his confidence to get to this point. But man, not even a month old as a baby, at 4 weeks old, he was born with a right cataract, and suffered in that eye condition and underwent surgery at 4 weeks old. And throughout his childhood and even into adulthood, that has affected how his eye looks. And essentially, as a child, that led to childhood bullying. And I asked him about just what was that experience like early in his life. Man, very graceful in his answer. And I'll just read a quote from Kyle here. The bullying happened because it was just immature kids that didn't know any better, and they see someone that's different from them. So I leaned on the loved ones around me, and sports served as an outlet. It taught me early to make sure that the voices in your inner circle were the ones that mattered. And then ultimately that leads into his perspective of how he treats broadcasting right now. And I'll just continue or finish the quote. Some people might love what I do. Some people might not love what I do on the air, but I know I'm putting my best effort and I'm putting in the work ethic to present my best product as an announcer. Whether they like it or they don't like it is something I can't control, but what I can control is my preparation and work ethic to get to that point. I feel like my eye condition is what built that confidence in me at an early age. So, dipping into his childhood and how his eye condition affected him. He also made it clear that it does not affect him now, his working conditions as an adult. His vision is completely clear. It's just the after effects from that surgery. As you can see in present day photos from his photo shoot, is how Kyle is portrayed today, but again, does not affect him at all, to make it clear. And then also just touching on another instance that stood out for me in the interview was that I believe this was the 2023 season. So in season, Kyle's role is, it touches many different areas across the Cowboys media team and operation. But essentially, he, like in season, especially on game days, he's their pregame and postgame studio on-air host. So doesn't really have any play-by-play responsibilities as it pertains to the regular season. But all right, so in 2023, it is a primetime game, Thursday Night Football. I believe they were playing the Seahawks. So November 2023, their primary play-by-play voice, Brad Sham, he's known as a legend down there in Dallas, but he had a last-minute emergency and could not make it to the stadium. And so, the Cowboys presidents and, Stephen Jones, the Jones family, they're freaking out. Who's going to call the game? It does not look like Brad is going to make it. Well, they knew that Kyle, they just obviously know of Kyle's preparation and all the work that he puts in. And, I'll touch on this here. But basically, they call Kyle about 90 minutes before the game and let him know that we need you to step in as the primary play-by-play voice on extremely short notice. He got to the booth about 40 minutes before. And even though that, again, he's not calling games throughout the season, this is a testament, to what I learned about his work ethic and preparation. So again, not calling games, but he makes his own spotter board, which, just for perspective for listeners who are not in journalism or in, know much about radio, but spotter boards are essentially, it has the entire roster, and there are charts arranged by number, by position, and, all of these detailed notes that these broadcasters are taking down throughout the week leading up to game day. And then throughout game day, they're able to, whenever it happens on the field, they can look down at their sheet immediately and have a list of facts and details, notes to provide the audience. So Kyle, getting back to the story when he filled in for Brad on this last minute primetime game, he had his own spotters ready to go. And essentially, it was the equivalent of like a Tyler Huntley filling in for a Lamar Jackson a last minute basis. So, I've talked to many other people around Kyle, and they always speak to his preparedness that goes into broadcast. I think if you just do a quick search on the Ravens tweet and the responses that it's generated from his colleagues down there, you'll learn a lot about what people think of him and what they're losing down there in Dallas. So yeah, again, like we a full circle answer about the bullying and the confidence that it brought to him now as a broadcaster and how he prepares for every game.
Yeah, I mean, to be ready in that moment with the spotter is pretty crazy, to just know that your name could be called at any time, and to make sure that you've done everything to be able to step into a position like that and on a market like that with as much attention as there is on the Cowboys, says a lot about what kind of work and work ethic that he has going into this job and approaching now this opportunity with the Ravens. So certainly somebody who is qualified and well driven to handle this job. And now, not being a Maryland guy, he's not really connected to the market. He's a Texas native, but somebody who is certainly going to have the task now of endearing himself to a new market, and one that is certainly a football market, and loves this Ravens team, and has a very large audience in its own right. So very interested to kind of see how that relationship grows between broadcaster and audience here, beginning here in the 2026 season. Now, Josh, we'd be remiss if we didn't at least mention that this opening itself early on had a bit of a weird controversy with veteran NFL broadcaster Bill Rosinski, previously serves the voice of the Panthers and the Falcons, kind of put the team on blast with his rejection letter, which seemed like an automated letter early in the process. He did not get interviewed. Bit of a weird look, wouldn't you say, Josh, just for somebody who didn't even get an interview to start in calling out an organization that, could be a potential employer for him down the line, but also just kind of now putting himself at odds with a team in a very public facing role.
Yeah, and clearly we're not involved in the discussions as it pertains to whittling down that list of candidates. And I think the Ravens do cover themselves in the sense that they did hire a third-party search firm to handle a majority of this search and process, but certainly not the greatest look. When you receive an email that almost reads like an automatic response as AI. Chad Steele, the senior vice president of communications for the Ravens, clarified that AI was not involved in that response to Bill Rosinski that he put out. And again, just to read what he blasted out in his rejection email, the Ravens cited, the Ravens are deciding to pursue other candidates whose background and experience are more closely aligned with the requirements of the position. So again, not the greatest look after, serving a role previously as voices for two teams. But again, you kind of look at the direction of where they went and what was leaving. Gerry Sandusky, he was 64 years old. Bill Rosinski, he's turning 73 this upcoming year. And ultimately they land with Kyle, who is 30, your age, right? Is that Unk status according to Lamar?
I'm 29, so maybe he's the Unk. I'm floating under.
Okay, yeah. So he's younger than me, a little bit older than you. So certainly that did cause a little bit of a stir, but the Ravens stood by their process in response to that. With journalists who reached out, I saw a story from, I believe it was the Charlotte Observer that covered that, but. Again, ultimately they land on Kyle Youmans, and just touching a little bit more on Kyle as a person. I touch on this in the story, but he's a father to triplets. I had to get that right. I almost said 3 triplets. 2-year-old triplets. They're actually 2.5. So, man, he has got a full house, and shout out to him and his wife, Lorena, that as they deal. I could not imagine having triplets.
Yeah. Especially as your first kid too, like you're going from 0 to 3. Like it's one thing if you have 2 kids and you get triplets, like that all of a sudden you have 5 kids running around, but at least you know how to change a diaper and raise a child. Now just to do it with your first kids is crazy.
Yeah, so essentially this is almost this is me paraphrasing my conversation with Kyle when I asked about that for the story, but so they were at her 8-week checkup. And, the doctor's looking at imaging and he says, wow, it looks like there's another one in there. And then they looked at it, and then him and his wife looked at each other, like celebrating, wow, we're going to have twins. And a few minutes later, he says, actually, there's a third one. And then at that point, he remembers vividly that they just burst out in laughter in the hospital room. And then here's the actual quote. That moment was one where we had so much emotion, we couldn't help but laugh and tear up and make the joke that, yeah, of course it's us that ends up with triplets. And just bringing it full circle to close the story. To bring them to Baltimore is a huge move, but I do believe it's what's best for our family. I think it's going to set us up for success for a long, long time. And I'm really excited to raise the family in Baltimore. And then he finishes on the job. This was my ending quote, the kicker. I think it's going to be a great fit. We're going to have a lot of fun on the broadcast. I'm going to bring a ton of information and a ton of prep. Ravens fans are going to get my 150%, and I can't wait for the fans to enjoy it for a long time. So a feel-good story, and it's certainly a challenge for Kyle coming up here. Again, not a job that opens up that often. Only 2 have ever filled the role in franchise history, and now Kyle Youmans takes over the headset.
Just about as rare as a Ravens head coach. in this organization. So not a lot of turnover there. We'll be interested to see how he settles in the booth. Guys, make sure to go check out Josh's story over at BaltimoreSun.com. Great stuff from him in there. Lots of details about the guy who is going to be a big part of this organization moving forward and how it connects with fans. So certainly give that a read. Josh, going to let you go here as you are coming up here on your boarding time for your next flight into Hawaii. So appreciate you making some time for us on your layover. Any final words for the good people?
Man, I will catch you in about a couple weeks. It's funny because I return around the Cubs series, and I'm from the Chicago area, and I've had I don't want to say so many people. I've had more than a handful of people reach out asking if I was going to be at that series because they would love to fly in and visit me. And coincidentally, I'm just like that's towards the tail end of my trip. So probably around that time I'll get back. Hopefully I'm a little bit more tan. We'll have some news to celebrate with you, and man, just again looking forward to getting away here for a little bit. But certainly all the best over these next few episodes. You've got some exciting plans. I don't want to tease too much for our listeners.
Absolutely. Yeah. We'll get into all that here very soon, but appreciate you, Josh. Have fun out there. Good luck with everything. Thank you all so much for listening. Want to make sure we get those views in, give us 5 stars over on Instagram, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, and give us a follow on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook. Thank you all so much again, and have a good one.